Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted podcast. I'm Dan Tilson, your host, and over there we've got John Byram.
How's it going?
Look, this is a really, really cool episode tonight because we have a very special guest. Been looking forward to this. We have Cade from the Intrinsically Ordered podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, Cade, it's been really cool to see how Intrinsically Ordered has really taken off. Your face is literally everywhere. You open up Instagram, YouTube, it pops up. And maybe the algorithm just figured out that, hey, I'm a gay Catholic. But I think some of the listeners here might be wondering what kind of message it is that you have for them, because here at Theology for the Unwanted, we are always trying to stress the idea of a disarmed theology, meaning we're not trying to impose ideas on top of people. We're trying to help them find ways to discover. And obviously, we really want everyone to feel welcome in the Catholic Church, no matter what it is that they're experiencing. For me, I also had negative experiences. I grew up in a traditional Catholic community. So my story rhymes with yours, except that you ended up leaving the church. And I was always told that if you want a happy life, you have to stay and live a perfectly moral Catholic life. And so I'm wondering, how have things been for you since you left? Tell the listeners, what is life really like once you make that jump?
Leaving the Catholic Church or any high-demand religion is a difficult thing because your entire life is invested into it. Your friendships, in my case, my career was also involved in the church. All of my beliefs, how I went through life, the hopes and dreams that I had for my own life, what I thought happened after this one, the axioms from which I operated, the comfort that I drew, the meaning that I made, was all inextricably intertwined with the Catholic Church and being a fully participating member. And the hard thing about leaving is that there is this sort of Catholic-shaped hole in your heart, not because we were designed in a particular way, but it's like they took a cookie cutter and just punched right through your heart. And when you are told either you have to live in a particular way or you have to leave in more traditional groups, it becomes a reluctant leaving. Where I think in more progressive spaces or in Protestant spaces or other religions, there's a lot of gray room to things where you can, in a certain sense, be living a double life or begin experimenting or figuring out what are the beliefs that you want to hold. But in my traditional Catholic upbringing, it's either you are all the way in and you are receiving sacraments, or upon kissing a guy for the first time, you are out of there because you've committed a mortal sin. And so the speed at which I left wasn't something that I necessarily wanted. I think if I had a way to stay attending Mass, I may have continued down that route. But for me, I am sad and also glad that it was a quick departure, because what it forced me to do is to be like a newborn deer and try using my legs for the first time, where there are so many mental muscles when you leave high-demand religion that you've never had to work before. This idea of how can I regulate my emotions without kind of this external system? How is it that I find meaning and purpose in day-to-day activities? What are the friends that I want around me? And then what are the moral decisions that I want to make? I'm somebody who's never had anything to drink, and I've never tried drugs or smoke before. And after leaving the church, it was do I want to do this? Some people go crazy, some people don't. In my case, I was no, I think I have good reasons to just not begin down that path. And I can also recognize other people that do drink or do smoke and go and I'm happy for you. It's not that I have this monopoly on truth. And so all these things between friendship and meaning and purpose and moral decisions and what I want to do with the rest of my life are now up to me. And I think that was overwhelming at first. But as I left, as I went to therapy, as I continued on with life, that mental muscle of making decisions for myself and being at peace with the pros and the cons of those and the things that I've learned, that mental muscle has grown over time. And so now, almost 3 years since leaving the church, I could not be more proud. It was a very difficult thing to leave, but now using my mental muscles to make life decisions and moral decisions and career decisions for myself based off of the data that I see and not having to line up with an external rule book is something that I'm incredibly proud of doing, because I'm very proud of my life. When I first left, I was will I ever get my life back on track? Will I ever find meaning? Will I ever find purpose? Mm-hmm. And I found that life is so much more profoundly meaningful when you get to construct the meaning. When the people that you care about are people that you care about because you want to care about them, not because of this honor or these relationships that you must have. and with my lifestyle decisions to go like, I made these and I have well-balanced opinions on things, I think it's awesome because those are like my decisions. And I'm also not threatened when somebody else makes different decisions. But that what I have built and how I live on a day-to-day basis, and the beauty that I find in the world, the meaning that I've constructed through my endeavors is something that I am proud to have built because I know that I built it. It's not simply matching up to something that has been laid out. It's not trying to discern like how do I fit myself into a preordained cookie cutter. It's that I get to design everything, which is scary. And also once you've built it is I'm incredibly proud of where I've ended up. And I think everything that the church told me when I was in it, which is it's all or nothing. It's either you are part of the church and you are chaste, or you are some sort of depraved addict 24/7, or kind of the two options on the table. You realize that there are a lot more options than that. And it's not Catholicism or atheism. It's not traditional sexual ethic versus hedonism. It's not sobriety versus debauchery. That there's a lot of gray area and there's a lot of different camps, and that you can find a place that you want to be.
I love that you give a picture of a black and white church, and you
Mhm.
have to pick what side of it that you're on, because I've experienced a lot of that myself. And I have to say, when we say there are the four marks of the church, there's one: holy, Catholic, and apostolic. The holiness is something that I'm still trying to understand in a deeper way, because there are so many people who are suffering in silence. They're in the pews, they're holding something deep down about themselves. There are times where folks are suffering from various addictions, and they feel like if they speak up, then they're going to be judged. And sometimes the individuals facing the addictions are even members of the clergy or staff or teachers at a parish. And obviously, there's this huge incentive for them to keep that secret. So you kind of broke through to the other side of that, where you are now free to speak whatever is on your mind, whatever your experiences have been. What do you think the future of the church is if we ever find a way to not make it so black and white? Like if we allow people to say, this is the reality I'm experiencing and I need you to be here with me without judgment. Would that have made a difference in your community?
Yeah, I think in traditional Catholic circles, there's this idea that the true church or the holy church is this sort of like ethereal ontological thing that we can't really investigate. And then there's like the broken side, which is the human side. And so definitionally, the church is incapable of being unholy because the church it technically is this kind of ethereal thing that is only good. And so anytime we see bad, it's always ascribed to human brokenness. And anytime it's something good, it's God's power. But what I think the church and religion at large is a sort of stone soup where Catholics have imported their lives and their experiences and their ideas and their stories, and then kind of like built this ontological floating edifice beyond it. But I think the beautiful thing about religion is that it is culture, it's psychology, it's literature, it's community. That the church is not this holy thing established by Christ. The church is the people that we see on Sunday and get to do the sign of peace with. That the church is the people that are out there working and helping the homeless. And the church is also the broken parts of it and the horrible parts of it. And I think that with when we can interact with the visible church, when we can realize that it's just us here, we can confront the bad parts because we don't have to chalk it up to some sort of Judas trying to infiltrate us, or that when people do bad things, it's some sort of somebody didn't pray hard enough or Satan did this thing. We can go like, hey, like we can hold people accountable because they don't have this special power over us. I think of the time that my former pastor is now in federal prison, and people were so adamant to say that it was the FBI, it was the witches that he was protesting previously, it was Satan causing a moral failing. But that, well, he has the indelible mark of being a priest, so he must be holy, and he said all of the holy things. It's like I think by leveling the church to being on this plane, we can appreciate the good parts, and we can extricate and get rid of the bad parts, and we don't have to play this special game of what is this sort of like transcendent good, this ontological good, or this nefarious evil. We can go, it's us. We can confront, we can move forward, we can heal, we can laugh, we can get rid of people. That the beauty of the church is found on this side of heaven.
In many ways, you and I have come to different conclusions about whether we feel spiritually at home in or outside of the church, but there's a lot of things that we do agree on. One of them is I think it's really lazy when we try to excuse the evil that happens in some parishes by simply saying, oh, it's bad men, but that's not the church. I think that's a really lazy excuse that thankfully, if anything good has come out of the abuse crisis of the past couple decades, it's been that theologians have felt more free to speak up. For example, Professor James Nikoloff, he started contrasting after the abuse crisis began 2 decades ago, the way that we would talk about gay Catholics or same-sex attracted Catholics. We used to simply dismiss it and say, oh, well, gay is to be selfish, is to be greedy, it's to want power. Real things that he found in the Vatican archives from the 1900s, so not even that long ago. So we do have a lot of biases that we have to overcome if we want the church to be holy. But what theologians are starting to see is that the church can both be sinful and on the way to conversion. And what we're struggling to find out is that where we find this new integrated definition of holy? Jon, I'd love to get your reaction because as we've talked in previous episodes, you're a convert. And I know that's something that converts really struggle with when they're coming into the church and they have to justify, like, hey, I believe in this, but also everyone's asking me how I can be part of this institution.
Yeah, I think as a convert, and even worse, a college convert, it's one of the things that when we were going through RCIA, it comes with the territory, right? It's an unfortunate truth of the Catholic Church, of the sex abuse scandal. But like I said in previous episodes, unfortunately, it wasn't just confined to the Catholic Church and the Catholic doctrine. It's a issue that has, it's not just a Catholic thing. It's not just a Christian thing. It's an organizational, it's a people in power kind of thing where people take that power and they abuse that power. It's a human element, if you will, right? It's humans in power going on a power trip, doing something that they should know better that you can and can't do. It was definitely hard to defend it. I mean, again, I came from a very devout Protestant household that was mainly Presbyterian and Methodist. Converting to the Catholic Church, I got every single question and accusation thrown at me that you could think of. Oh, you worship statues. Why do you have to go through saints? Why can't you just pray to God? Do you think you're better than everyone else? And, and again, that all comes from a place of people not knowing the theology of the church. And you have that ability to share your knowledge that you're getting through RCIA, but it also comes with the questions of, hey, but you heard about what happened in this diocese. You heard about what happened in that diocese. How can you be a part of that? Do you feel like now that you're choosing to join this organization, this religion, that you're accepting of this? And the answer is no. And I think that's where converts can really come in and make big impact is one, when you take a look at like priests in the church and they're held to this like high moral authority because they are a priest, they have that mark. It's kind of the same thing with converts. Converts chose to join the church. So cradle Catholics look at converts as almost like, Catholic 2.0 or Catholic supersize because they made the choice to join the church. But as a convert, that also means that, I'm a critical thinker. I'm someone who is constantly thinking and questioning. I have no problem pulling a priest to the side and asking them to dive deeper into a homily or, hey, you said something, or the way you handled this situation, walk me through your thought process. Why did you feel the need to publicly do X, Y, and Z? I have no problem going and having those tough conversations where some people would rather sit back and go, hey, he's a priest in the church, can't really do that. He is the authority here at this parish. And I'm back here, growing up in a military family going, well, I like to question things. I always like to question things. And if you can't answer my questions, then, I'm not going to continue to go to this parish. I'm going to go to someplace that can answer my questions or wants to engage in dialogue so I can either A, grow in my faith, or B, challenge myself. And I think that's the big part is joining a faith is you're challenging yourself in your moral beliefs, in your thoughts of your own life as well. But at the same time, you don't want to settle, right? you're joining an organization, you want this religion, you want the community to be a better place, a more inclusive place, a more safe place for everyone. So when you see those injustices, when you see those issues, you can't sweep it under the rug. You can't do what the church did for decades. You can't sweep it under the rug. You have to call it out. And I feel like that's where converts can really come in and make a big impact. Is we can be vocal. We can come out and say, hey, look, this is wrong. We need to do something about this. Like, we can't just hide this.
I'm a cradle Catholic, and so a lot of times I just feel like I'm observing the things that are happening around me. And one thing that I really respect about both of you is you really own your beliefs. So in many ways, Jon, you had to construct as a convert. Cade, you deconstructed. But what I'm curious is, what gave both of you, and I'll ask this to Cade first, what gave you the courage to start saying, like, actually, I think this is what I believe? How did you get there?
Yeah, if I can first touch on more on the abuse crisis, what I find interesting is I grew up in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, which was essentially threatened with some extreme charges from the local DA for never having addressed the crisis in the church. And what the diocese essentially learned and brought into practice was that nobody or no institution is too holy to fail. In the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, filed for bankruptcy, essentially laid out all of their documents to the local DA, and the only way out of being prosecuted and having incredible settlements was to implement parish-wide and archdiocesan-wide training programs and reviews and protocols. And so growing up, it was kind of when the abuse crisis was becoming public, watching our former archbishop essentially go into hiding over mishandling it, bringing in a new archbishop, Archbishop Hebda, who's a former lawyer, who took incredible steps to address what's happening in the church. And everybody in the diocese became aware that nobody is too holy to fail, that we're not trying to do PR for a sort of like spiritual salvation store that we can't talk about, but we're trying to protect people. And now on every archdiocesan website, it's your first call should be to the police, not to some diocesan investigator. Whereas when I was in Denver with our pastor, who's now in federal prison, they hadn't reconciled with that as a traditional community, that even if somebody seems holy, even if somebody says the right things, even if you don't see any signs, they can still be monsters, they can still be predators, they can still be a lot of things according to how he pled in his own case. And so the traditional movement, I think, still has to reconcile with the idea that people are not too holy to fail and that everybody must be held accountable and everybody is still human. And so then leading into the bigger question, which you asked on like owning your beliefs, I think that in many ways, the Novus Ordo apologetics class within the Catholic Church has recognized that people have very different beliefs of than the Catholic faith oftentimes, and that you have to be pastoral is like the buzzword of every internet discourse, which is like you have to accompany and you have to listen to. And yelling at somebody for being a heretic or an apostate does not work. And I don't think the traditional movement has caught up on the idea that they are not popular among people at large in civilization. But they see from their own experience, like, well, the most radical people join our group. So if we just radicalize everybody, like, it'll work better. But they've only seen a fraction of the pie, which is people who are already more radically aligned to begin with. And the one thing that stuck with me from going from like Novus Ordo apologetics into the traditional world, and then what started leading me out of the traditional world is like, we have to at least be honest with our own thoughts and to really think through things and to scrutinize things. And kind of the Novus Ordo talking point is like, we can investigate Catholic beliefs and we can ask questions, and that 1,000 questions doesn't equal one doubt, as Benedict talks about, and that the truth is out there and we can let people discover it. And so I went on that journey for a second time. When I first joined, it was like, well, we got all these talking points, we have all these arguments. The truth is Catholicism. And then as I was kind of deconstructing traditionalism and looking again at staying in Novus Ordo circles, it was like, I should investigate this a thing. Like I know the talking points now, I can really scrutinize them. And what I found is that they didn't match up to what they were asking of us. I think if the church was suggesting things or proposing things, or this might be a good idea to follow, but come to your own conclusions, I probably wouldn't be running a channel about Catholicism. But by especially the traditional or the dogmatic or the black and white side of the church, I felt like, no, it seems like the answers are somewhere in the gray zone, that they're not perfectly in line with this particular book, that it seems like the answers to our problems, the peace that surpasses all understanding, the unfulfilled desire of our hearts, as C.S. Lewis talks about, is found somewhere in the gray zone. And I think I found no other option than to admit where I was. And I hope that my beliefs change. I hope that 10 years from now, when I look back at this interview, there are new ideas that I have and different ideas that I have, is my hope. And that I think thought and investigation and apologetics and philosophy and theology are dynamic endeavors that change as we gather information, not just having to uphold the same point that we want to and backfilling it with half-baked reasoning.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said too. I mean, obviously from the opposite side as being a convert, there was some deconstruction on belief on my side as well, mainly growing up with what the Protestant churches kind of tell you about what the Catholic Church is. I've been very transparent with my religious journey here on this show. It really was a catalyst after a major episode in battle with depression. So it was something that I was trying to piece back together my life. And just for whatever reason, I kept getting drawn back to the idea of organized religion after being away from organized religion for several years, kind of living the way that I thought my life would be best lived, just kind of doing whatever I wanted to do. You mentioned how, like, when people tend to fall away from the church, they tend to go crazy a little bit. They tend to like, oh, I want to do the drugs. I want to drink. I mean, I didn't do the drugs, but, I joined a fraternity in college, which was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life. And that increased.
And most expensive.
And it was the most expensive fraternity on college campus. That don't join a fraternity. But it was a culmination of going through all of that and then going through that battle with depression that really kind of made me rethink and kind of regather my life. And one of the things going through RCIA is I realized that, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, so I found that there's no way I think anybody can agree with the Catholic Church 100% or with any organized religion 100%. Cade, you made a comment about how there's more of like this ability to kind of move about in Protestant Christianity, and you're 100% spot on, right? You don't like what your minister is saying at one Lutheran church, you can go to another one, and it's a completely different flavor of Lutheranism or Protestantism or Anglican, or pick your denomination. It changes based upon the church you go to and who is the minister at that church. The Catholic Church is not like that. It's definitely more structured. It's probably, I'm not gonna say overstructured, but it's definitely more for people that need that kind of structure in their religious journey. Coming into the Catholic Church, that's something to this day I still struggle with, is my own personal beliefs versus what the church believes. And to this day, when I have a conversation with someone about the Catholic churches or my personal beliefs, I always ask them, well, are you asking me from a place as a Catholic, or are you asking me as a place as me, John, the person? Because prime example, like when it comes to gay marriage, if you ask me what the church believes, I'm going to tell you that the church believes that the sacrament of marriage is between one man and one woman. You ask me what my personal belief is, marriage is marriage. It's two people who love each other, period, end of story. And that's where I draw the line. Yes, it goes against Catholic teaching, but that's my personal opinion. But I also recognize that's not the Catholic Church's opinion. And that's, one topic that I struggle with, accepting the Catholic Church on. And I feel like that's part of my personal faith journey, is that those areas that are gray, where I struggle with what the church teaches versus what I personally believe, that's where I ask the questions. That's where, I have those debates with people and kind of wanting to expand my knowledge and hear different perspectives and kind of either confirm my own personal beliefs or let people confirm the Catholic Church's position on those topics. So with me, I agree. It's definitely a fluid journey. I think in 10 years, is there a possibility that my belief system, my belief ideals would it change? I would hope they would. I don't want to be stagnant, whether it's my personal beliefs or my religious beliefs. Like, I want to be constantly challenged in my own beliefs and grow as a person, and then as a Catholic as well. And then wherever that journey takes me is where that journey takes me.
Well, John, in a previous episode, we had talked about how we love to obsess about vice.
Yes.
I think when we were talking about the issue of gay marriage, you had pointed out that the conversation almost always gravitates towards sex, which for most couples who are married, straight or gay, at some point, sex is really not a major defining point of the relationship, that it actually goes much deeper. And so my hypothesis is that theology is just reality. That's all it is. Like that image we used of a candle in a dark room. We all live in the room together, and faith is the candle that helps us see where we're going. It's not like this imposition. It's not like this controlling monster, but it's a sort of freedom. And Cade, I want to tie that back to your podcast, Intrinsically Ordered, because I believe, as I said, if we talk about vice too much, it's another way of talking about ourselves. And so if we're always talking about acts that are intrinsically disordered, it's another way of talking about the self. So you, as a non-Catholic, you've actually already flipped the script. And I'm hoping you can tell me more about the mission of your podcast.
Yeah, I like to say that the work that I do is pursuing de-radicalization, not deconversion, where I'm not fundamentally interested in prescribing what people can do on Sundays or what beliefs they must hold. I don't find that a particularly interesting thing to pontificate about. I think the endeavor that I'm hoping to do is to allow people to critically think about their beliefs wherever they end up. I was talking to a friend, and part of the mission that I think that I do is like reading the terms and conditions of some sort of like program that you're signing up with. That when the store says free returns, and then you read the fine print, and it's like, well, kind of. And so I think with Catholics who are joining the church, or people who are becoming more radical, or in the process of deconversion, I hope that what I can help them do is make an informed decision, and one that honestly reflects what they think in any particular moment, and that they can come to either side of a conclusion with some thoughts, so that they are not rigid or dogmatic about whatever position that they end up in. That a lot of my own supporters and a lot of my own followers disagree with me, and I think that is a good thing. That not everybody is like, well, Cade thinks this. And it's like, brother, I am 22 and thoroughly unqualified to talk about all of these possible positions. And so when it comes to the podcast in particular, what the Catechism says and what Catholicism at large says is that the homosexual orientation is intrinsically disordered, which is a sort of like Platonic philosophical idea that the desires that we have cannot be fulfilled because there is no sexual complementarity. That desire to build a life with, the desire to fall in love with, the desire to have sex with, is something that cannot be fulfilled because no children can come from that particular union. And so when I was thinking about my podcast, what I wanted to do is kind of use Catholic-like imagery, but not in the sort of like, I'm going to burn things down type of way, but rather that I think that the desire inside of us as gay men to build lives with, to fall in love with, to care deeply about, to build lifelong partnerships is fundamentally intrinsically ordered. That for us to healthily pursue those passions, to pursue romance, to pursue love, to pursue acceptance, is something that only ends in a better life on either side of the religious discussion. That I have found that I think in particular of a couple that I had the joy of interviewing, where they fell in love right around 50. One had been in a previous marriage and came out later in life. The other one had been in a few different relationships, but hadn't found the one. And at 50, this gay couple came together, and they both thought, we'd love to have kids. And so they went through the arduous process of becoming foster parents, and they took in the kids that straight couples wouldn't even take in. And they had the biggest joy of their life was taking in two kids who were children of a drug-addicted mother. They came in with cigarette burns on them, and one of them was born addicted to drugs. And at 55, they'd fallen in love. They built this amazing family. They've poured so many resources into these kids, and the oldest is now a freshman out at a university and on track for an amazing life. And the other child is on track as well. And so I think them pursuing as the church would say, like homosexual desires is nothing but intrinsically ordered. It has made their lives better. It has made their legacy better. It has made the life for their kids better. They are both local pillars of their local church. It has made nothing but their relationship with God more ordered and more fruitful and more amazing and dynamic. That I think that orientation that all of us have, when pursued healthily, leads to nothing but love. And as Christ said, to have life and to have it abundantly. And I see that is fundamentally what I hope to put out there, is that you are not intrinsically disordered. That if you can love yourself, if you can fall in love, you will make nothing but yourself and the world and your relationship with a higher power nothing but more beautiful and life-giving.
I think you summarized moral theology very, very well there, which is we are called to live exactly, precisely as God made us. And for many reasons, we all have biases that we have to overcome, whether they're internal, whether they're comments that people have made about us. These are things that we have to overcome. And as long as we can agree on the statement that you and I are called to live exactly as we were made by God, I don't care if it takes 50 years for us to figure out exactly what that means for me. But the idea of being Catholic for me is that we are trying, we are on that journey. I don't see holiness as like flipping a light switch, like today I was holy and yesterday I was not. I see it as a process of becoming everything that God made me for. I wonder sometimes if maybe we've made religion a little too simple. Maybe we have this desire to kind of like have all of our beliefs like locked down in a box and it's ironclad. We've just oversimplified things. And when I obviously you're talking about intrinsically ordered here for LGBT individuals, but it gets at earlier definitions of sin, which by the way have morphed over time. For example, theologian Father Keenan at Boston College, he wrote about how the sin against nature was an 11th century term. But as far as sexuality goes, he was saying that sin against nature is anything that doesn't go into the proper vessel. And the consequence of that idea is it means that self-pleasure, masturbation, is a substantially more grievous sin than violence against a woman. And so when you think about that with the modern lens and how that fundamentally fails to understand the dignity of the human person, you start to realize that, okay, we have this idea of where we're going. We understand that sin is a failure to love God. But as we go through the centuries, hopefully we become more aware of how to apply it and how to teach it. And I think there's this failure in some communities, particularly in the United States, to recognize just how much the Catholic Church has evolved is the wrong word because that's kind of like when a Pokemon, levels up. Is that the right word, John?
Hey, we're in this episode 4 and finally Pokemon makes an appearance.
Okay.
Look at that.
But develops is a better word. And there's a lot of saints that have written on the very rigorous ways that the church develops. But I'm getting a sense that people think that what the Catholic Church teaches right now is full and complete, and it's always been that way, and it's never changed, and it is done being developed. That's so sad to me because that would tell me that God is done revealing himself to us. And I don't know, did you experience that sense too in your former community that people just wanted to lock things in a box?
There's a quote that Catholic apologists like to say, which is that to read the early church is to cease to be Protestant, is the line that they like to repeat. And the idea that what the Catholic Church provides is a sort of bulwark against uncertainty and liberalism. But I think to read the history of the Catholic Church is to cease to be dogmatic about moral issues. That it seems like the only certain thing in the Catholic Church is change over the centuries. And I just had a debate on homosexuality in the Bible, and I think a perfect example of this concept is usury, where in biblical times and in the early church, usury was entirely forbidden, it was condemned. And then now that we have a modern economy that's based on fractional reserve banking, and that to retire well is to put your money into a 401k and to invest and to just open up your local Wells Fargo account. The context of this behavior has so rapidly changed that we can't say that it is the same thing or that charging interest is the same thing as 200 BC talking about kind of sort of exploitative investments. The church has also changed on the idea of capital punishment, which is even one in recent memory, where it's gone from something that every base trad cat loves to talk about how glorious the death penalty is, and now it's this is entirely inadmissible. That how the Catholic Church views sacramentology and moral questions and even sexuality has changed so drastically over time. That if we say that we have a God that has designed us, a God that we can discern through natural law, that we can look at teleology, a God who wants communion, a God who wants for us to live these happy, holy lives that a lot of these theology of the body type of folks talk about now, much to the chagrin of conservatives, that the Catholic Church is a dynamic institution if we read documents historically. Now, it certainly has many failures, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But Catholics like to think of the Catholic Church's pronouncement on homosexuality as dogmatic or from a council or unchangeable. And the answer is no. Like the church has changed on all of these issues. And this sort of like this prohibition of gay marriage is not based on the councils. It hasn't been solemnly defined. That most of these documents and ideas are from the 70s and these sort of like pronouncements on the Vatican's website that the Catholic Church hasn't formally addressed in councils or in councils or in ex-cathedra statements or any sort of these unchangeable ideas of the church. The church has not spoken on these issues, at least in a way that entirely precludes the idea of updating the teaching. So whether it's salvation outside of the church or consists in versus consists of or ecumenism or the death penalty or all of these things have drastically changed over the issue or over the years. And so it seems like when Catholics say, well, homosexuality is a set issue that we can't address, it sort of reveals this clinging to certainty for certainty's sake, that the idea of having to open Pandora's box and having to critically think frightens many traditional Catholics. But I think one thing that we've learned since the council, and that many religious orders do well, is that questions and prayer and discernment are something that God does not forbid, and that we find God in those questions and in the prayerful process and in the discernment and in talking to people in this sort of like synodal way. That's where God is found. And what a weak God to think that even by asking questions, we are somehow offending a divine creator. He's created us with minds. He's created us in a particular way. So asking questions and seeing what we're made for, if that somehow shuts out the idea of God, he must be quite the weak creator in a traditional understanding.
I tend to be more conservative, but I have never felt threatened by the idea of something changing, particularly if the church is able to explain to me the continuity. Or, for example, when the church many centuries ago changed its position on slavery, it was, again, an awareness of the principle of human dignity and how, in order to allow human dignity to organically flourish, we kind of had to snip something that was blocking the sunlight, which was saying that slavery is something that you can be born into, and that is according to God's law. So the church has course corrected. It's made many, many U-turns. I've never felt threatened by this because the church has generally rigorously tried to apply that continuity. And to me, that's important. But I do feel like moral theologians tend to be a little bit too hard on JP2, in particular with the document that kind of outlined moral theology as it's taught in universities today, Veritatis Splendor. Because to me, JP2 understood that for several centuries, we had reduced understanding sin to judging acts without regard for their context, without regard for their intentions. And even though Veritatis Splendor still very much focuses on like what is the act that we are judging, he was at least restarting a conversation that we had lost for many, many centuries. And so I think we have to get better about discerning. You mentioned synodality. Synodality, I think, can be very helpful in that Catholics from diverse experiences can raise their hand and say, hey, the way you just explained that teaching has absolutely no relevance to my life. Here in the United States, I think we have been a little too spoiled in the sense that life is not uber difficult like it is in other parts of the world. We don't have missiles falling. We have a lot of poverty, but we do have food pantries. We have ways to help individuals out. And one thing that I bring up a lot is catastrophe medicine. So the new field of ethics, particularly as we're starting to go into a greater period of conflict in the world, is understanding the difficulty of applying moral acts on the battlefield. So, for example, your buddy just got shot in battle and you guys are on the move and you have to decide, do I give him morphine, which takes away the anxiety, but will probably hasten his death? Or do I just kind of like let him lay there anxiously hurting as I run away? This was a theoretical example in the United States until Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when we did have a hospital I believe it was Memorial Hospital in New Orleans, and they were being fired at by individuals in the neighborhood. They were out of power, they were out of food. It was over 100 degrees in the hospital, and they were evacuating individuals. And any Catholic would have told you at the time, you can absolutely not give these individuals morphine if it will hasten their death. And the doctors ended up fretting over whether or not they just let their patients lie in misery as they evacuate. I think it was like 2/3 of the patients, and the other third had to be left behind because that's how it went. So this is kind of the new, for theological ethics, this is like the new landscape that people are trying to deal with. And it means that we're going to have to come to a conclusion really fast that it's complicated. The world is not black and white, that most of us live in the gray most of our lives. And particularly when you're trying to judge acts, whether it's sexuality or whether it's a doctor on the battlefield, like it's complicated out there. And I'm in some ways afraid because there seems to be an unwillingness in many Catholic circles to have these tough conversations about how to move forward. What have you heard from some of the guests that you've had on your show? Like, are you sensing that they understand that there's an incompleteness that we have to work through, or do they feel like everything is, it's written in stone and we can't change?
It depends on who I'm talking to. I think there is a young, zealous type of class within the church, particularly of converts, like when I was coming into the movement, that have found this sort of like bastion of ethical thought, where the Catholic Church has thought about every issue from every angle, and that we go to our graves following these particular imperatives. But it's also like 18-year-olds trying to tell people what to do when it comes to abortion healthcare in cases of sexual assault, where it's like you are 18 and you read a book about the philosophy of abortion, right? Like you have no business understanding what a 14-year-old has gone through in a rural town who is living on the streets. You don't understand what that is like. Or they talk about issues like homosexuality in this sort of flippant manner, which is, well, the church says whatever the church rules are lead to true flourishing, even if it's difficult. And so even though you might be telling me this heartbreaking story, or that you and your husband have adopted these kids, it's just like, well, you should just stop, because if you stop, then you're going to be following the church, and the church is going to lead to flourishing. It's a sort of unfalsifiable hypothesis around very tough moral questions, sold with this intricate facade of complex words, this ornate sort of ethical endeavor, where you go, right, we have the principle of double effect. We have these types of questions. We have, what are the intrinsically disordered things that we can never do? What are the things that we can have this gray zone for? Like, there's all these questions. And I think to somebody who's never had to live through an experience, it's a really cool thing and a really neat thing to have big philosophical concepts from a Catholic lens about really complex issues. And then as I was getting older, in the Catholic Church, there was a lot of very thoroughly Catholic individuals who had seen life, who had seen complex situations, who had seen things and lived through things that I could never understand, and politely told me to maybe have my mind just a little bit more open. I think of the guy he was an older gentleman, and I still talk to him to this day. I mean, him and I went to morning mass every day when I was in high school, and him and I went to breakfast, and he was thoroughly in line with Catholic teaching. And even though he could hold that, like, yeah, I believe what the Catholic Church has to say, he kind of pumped my brakes on this zeal that the Catholic Church's solutions are easy and always the best option. And then as I've kind of left the church and have had the pleasure of interviewing a number of people, both inside and outside and somewhere in between, is that I think there's a distinction between the Vatican and between Catholicism, where there's the Vatican with the rules and the manuals and codes of canon law and all these papal documents. And then there's Catholics. There is the universal church. There are the people living in rural South America, and there are people living in the capitals of cities in Africa, and there are people living in hiding in Afghanistan, and there are people from the deep South who are somewhat Catholic depending on the day of the week. And what I think that I've learned is that things are really complex, that I think that we have to stretch our minds to understand that people can make decisions that we aren't always happy with. And that the lived reality of really complex questions is not as easy as your Thomistic sort of ethical professor is talking about. And that sometimes we can We can reevaluate our belief systems, or we can look at a complex situation and go, I don't understand and don't agree with this decision, but I understand that you are at peace with this and you've thought about this and lived through this way more than I ever have. And then I think there's a number of voices within the church that understand that, hey, if we have Christ as our guiding principle, if we have flourishing as our guiding principle, maybe there's some technicalities in the rules that have room to be updated.
I think you challenge us in a really healthy way. Obviously, I think going to daily mass is still extremely important. We had an episode on confession and how to make that more fruitful and how to understand the theological terms in a deeper way. So I still very much hope that all of my listeners, no matter what they're going through, can find that way to be Catholic. But your story is so important because you challenge us. You prevent us from kind of getting in that bubble. And I think you're doing something that is a great service to the Catholic community, whether that was your intention or not. So I want to thank you for that. Now, before we close out, is there anything that we should look for coming up soon on Intrinsically Ordered?
Ooh, I have, I think now 12 episodes that are unpublished that are on the calendar. It's a mix of people a mother who left the church after dealing with some really complicated pregnancies and being told that birth control was entirely off the table. I have a podcast with somebody who is an OnlyFans star who has actually returned to Catholicism since beginning his career.
Interesting.
I have people that I just published a debate just today talking with a young Catholic apologist on the Bible and homosexuality. I have a few progressive Catholics that have been on. There's a few other shows that I've been on. So I think this kind of next set of 12 interviews are an incredibly dynamic and diverse group of voices that are coming through. And that's what I love about my podcast channel. Or I put it this way, I have my main channel where I put up my own thought pieces that I go through those scripts and I film and I re-edit the scripts and then I hold them in kind of a holding pattern. And I've updated plenty of scripts even since I've written them. And they only go out when I'm like, this is something that I kind of want to stamp my name on. And what I love about the podcast channel and that I'm wanting to do even more of is having on voices that aren't my own, to have people of diverse perspectives, of diverse stories. And on the podcast channel, it's always the videos that I don't expect to pop off that are the ones that pop off the most. And the ones that I'm most proud of are the ones that tank. And the ones that have new voices are the ones that people love. So it's
I guarantee you Jon listens to all of them.
I do. I can't confirm that.
Yeah, and so I love having that freedom to just have voices on, because I think one thing that I like to push people who are atheist or who are leftist or whatever sort of terms I want to throw out there is that like ideas aren't scary. That to like hear people's stories and to shine a light on them does not harm critical thinking. That yes, there's stories that we have to be responsible about telling. There's concepts that we do have to think about platforming. But I think that I am okay with reality, wherever that leads. That I hope that my beliefs are changed and updated as I hear more stories, as I hear new thoughts. That I don't think on whether it's the progressive atheist left or the conservative Catholic right, that we have to be afraid of listening to new ideas and being in people's shoes who we've never been in before. Because wherever reality is where I want to end up. And so if we can tell those real stories, if we can think through these real questions, wherever we end up is going to be the right place.
It's crazy just how Catholic your message really is. And again, I know that's coincidental, but like that's theology is reality. And it's, as Pope Leo said in his opening statement from the balcony, we're searching for that disarmed Christianity. And it doesn't mean like holding a weapon. That means using our words in ways that help us discover God. And so I want to thank you for that. And of course, I want all the listeners to go, if they haven't already, find you at Intrinsically Ordered on TikTok and on Instagram. Am I missing anything there?
The YouTube channel is where I put the long form episodes. They're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And then the short form platforms, I pull clips from time to time. And then my main YouTube channel is Gay X Trad, or if you just look up Cade Bradley, and then all of my short form platforms are once again clips from that. I know a lot of creators that have blown up on short form platforms from scripting specifically for short form, but I think the ideas that I like to discuss are ones that simply cannot be done justice in 90 seconds. And that's why I appreciate the long form conversations and podcasts and YouTube videos, that whatever the length of the video is, it's something that I have given it justice, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour and a half. And that's what I love about long form, is to dive into these issues. And then all the other channels are fun clips and moments that lead people like breadcrumbs back to the meat and potatoes of the ideas and conversations.
Perfect. Well, it's been a huge honor having you as part of this episode. So thank you so much for your time. And to all the listeners, as always, your stories matter for the church. They have theological implications. And so whatever it is that you have experienced, whatever it is that you're holding deep down, I want you to know that when you find the courage to tell your story, it helps the church to convert. It helps the church to become more holy. And in the meantime, go to the website Theology for theunwanted.com for reflections. Reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to help you, and take a look at Cade's content at Intrinsically Ordered. Thank you so much, and until next time.